You're listening to the Culture Junkie podcast, where we go beyond the surface of pop culture.
I'm Keith.
And I'm Xandra. Together, we dive into the craft process and passion that drive today's creators. This is the Culture Junkie podcast. Life moves fast and your insurance should too. With on-the-fly insurance, you can compare rates, customize your coverage, and get a quote in minutes. It's 100% online, 100% secure, and 100% Canadian. So whether you're on the go or planning ahead, protect what matters most with ease. Head to ontheflyinsurance.com and get protection made easy. Built for life on the fly. Links in the bio or in the show notes below.
Hey, Xandra.
Hi, Keith Beckle.
How you doing today?
I'm pretty good. We're here in 2026 and we're making new moves, fresh perspectives, and I'm excited about what we have in store.
Yeah, I really want to talk about how we're going to roadmap what we're doing here on the Culture Junkie podcast. I want to talk kind of about where we're heading and who we're talking to and why we're expanding the kind of creators we're bringing into the conversation.
Now, we've really focused a lot on art and sports, which are really a big part of culture. That's more your expertise than my expertise. But I think that's what makes it so interesting is that you bring in all sorts of expertise that I might not know about. Whereas I'm surprised you actually pull in so much filmmaking expertise as well. So who knew? Who knew you'd be a wide breadth of all sorts of topics?
Yeah, it's really neat. I mean, we got sports. We got live music, a television aspect. It's the stuff that people are obsessing over every day, right? And when we started talking about this podcast, what did creator mean to you?
I think creator meant to me, like, if you think about it, YouTube started 20 years ago this year. So I was really thinking about new media when I would think about creator. I, and I think that's kind of what the topic has turned into right now is creating new media for different platforms, be it TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. So I think for me and a lot of other people, that was the concept of what creator was. When I started this podcast, though, and we started talking to people, I think my idea of creator expanded to include people who weren't necessarily creating content. They were all kinds of creators.
So I guess we kind of expanded naturally, but one thing that we really are mindful about is we're not leaving the arts behind and just getting strictly into pop culture. The arts are the foundation and the creativity behind it, and I think everything else builds on that, right?
Well, art is, I think, a reflection of culture, literally, your society. And so that's why we want to center that in this podcast is without art, perhaps we're just looking at spreadsheets and numbers. But we were talking to some people today about creators and podcasts and stuff like that. Everybody receives information differently is kind of how the conversation arose to the surface. And it was kind of like some people like to read, some people enjoy pictures, some people enjoy listening to podcasts, and some of the people we were talking to today, get their inspiration from mixed media style stuff, um, painting, uh, getting to see the physical experience of, say, paint on a canvas. And it's very interesting to see how that it actually does reflect the culture. Perhaps we're talking about the rise of Keith Haring, example, in New York in the 80s. That was definitely a type of painting, even though it was literally coming from the cultures of the street and the culture of being gay and the culture of the AIDS epidemic and New York in the 80s and then how that expanded from the street culture and graffiti into the art world and opened up to galleries and went on a whole different level of communicating the culture of what is New York, who are New Yorkers, and what is happening in this moment in time. So
Yeah,
that's
and
a
that's
very good example, I think.
yeah, that's really interesting you say that because when I think of New York in the 80s, along with the art scene, we got punk rock in the late 70s and hip hop in the early 80s. And that comes out of that street culture that you're talking about from both sides. And it's just part of the tapestry that made up the culture of that particular place and that particular time. And that resonated. I think that had an influence on everywhere in the world.
Well, it's funny how you should say that because I think that influence has really risen again right now. If you look at culture in this contemporary moment, I would say the 80s are really informing it right now. A nostalgic echo,
Hmm.
trying to, for people who are younger, I think they're trying to think about what do I want to imagine life was like in a time when they felt they could see things making sense in their way. Perhaps they weren't dealing with the same things that they're dealing with now, so they can almost put rose-colored glasses on in this nostalgic way, even though the '80s were not perfect in any stretch or form at all, especially in New York. You know, New York, I think that was New York had a very, very difficult time, and
Crime
that was
City.
before they yeah, it was crazy, and that was before they did the "I Love New York" campaign and brought the city up, so it's really interesting to see how art can affect the municipality, the entire structure of how people would want to go to the city, and then bringing advertising into that art, because the "I Love New York" icon, the iconic "I Love New York" was a full advertising campaign, and then it became part of the New York culture. So much so that now you look back and it is a little bit cliche at this point. I think it's very interesting to see how we're having this nostalgic resurgence, rising from the ashes and feeling like they're in a different, better, grittier, sequin covered big hair, punk rock dance music kind of place. So it's kind of interesting to see that reflected back in the style, the clothing, the glasses, the colors and the hair. I'm really happy to see it, but it is definitely, I would say, it's stylized in a way that it is nostalgic to the point of not really it doesn't have the edge that the '80s actually had, but that's okay because that edge in the '80s was tough. It was difficult. Punk rock came up before the '80s, but it came up to prominence because things were really tough and they were responding to that moment in time.
Yeah, it's clear to see that the arts are the foundation of the culture as we look at it, and everything else builds on that, right? But what it's funny, artists bring the cultural conversation, they bring the cultural language, but they get lost in the commerce and the commercial aspect of life, a lot of it.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is?
Money drives all platforms. As an artist, like we were talking about the graffiti writers. That's like the most basic way of getting out, getting your paintings out in the world without having to pay fees or get an agent or be in the art world or be privileged enough to be able to spend your time being an apprentice for someone. And if you look at it, it's the platforms have the money and they want to platform who their friends are, who they believe in, who they know personally. That I think that's why advertising and marketing end up kind of driving art is because that's a very good way to make money and also that's how the platform is going to make money. So as creators, I think it's a great way to shake hands and have a complementary marketing relationship with the platforms and your own art rather than try and reject marketing completely until such moment comes that you are being swept away from it. So I think it's a good idea to have a healthy relationship with it. Back in the day, they would rise to prominence because they were so authentic, they were so creative and inspiring, and then they would get taken on by advertising, a brand maybe, and then they didn't know what to do with themselves. They didn't know what to do with the success. They didn't know what to do with the money, and they didn't know how to live in a world where perhaps the brand is use it up and then throw it away. And then how do you feel about your art? So I think it's a good idea to have some kind of education and a little bit of practice with putting your art in a marketing sphere and knowing how to market yourself and what you want to say. As we were out tonight, everybody was asking, "What's your elevator pitch? Who are you?" And it is a skill to be able to say, "This is who I am, this is what I stand for," and a lot of people, it's difficult. They could do it for somebody else. It's like cleaning your own house. You could clean somebody else's house, but getting your own stuff in order is very difficult. So, I think as an artist and as a creator, it's a good idea to inquire and interrogate yourself before you become successful, because once you're successful, woo, you're just all over the place.
So, is that why you feel it's important to give voices a platform, especially local voices, people who are kind of flying under the radar, but because we feel that everyone's worthy of consideration and everyone's got something to add to the environment. And so, I mean, is that kind of what drives you to with the artistic bent of our Culture Junkie creator podcast?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is giving smaller creators a chance, smaller artists, smaller creators of all kinds, whether they be art, a business, technology, giving them a voice and practicing talking about who they are, practicing interrogating what they want with their own art, whether or not they feel comfortable in front of the camera is a whole other thing. But we want to sort of explore local creatives and local creators and see what inspires them and what drives them to do what they do, because the wider world might not necessarily know exactly what's going on in this smaller sphere of influence that we have, because everything within this smaller area really does have a different experience, a different flavor, and that's going to inform all the different cultures that you can come out of there. And it's nice to be able to show people outside of the area what kind of flavors you have over here.
Yeah, and as they say, culture doesn't stop at the gallery door. I mean, we spoke to Aurelia, and she's a gamer, and she's got a whole creative bent that's tied into her persona as a gamer. And we're bringing on creators from sports and movies and TV and live music. Well, what excites you about that? About it being exposed to all these different types?
Well, already I've been, as you say, exposed to different types of people, and I've learned a lot of things. And just being able to talk back and forth about topics that I'm not the expert in. So that's like the main thing that I'm really looking forward to, is gathering more people around so that I can hear what motivates them, what inspires them. And it's not just in my purview, because I'm more of the film, television expert. I'm interested to find out, okay, well, what is informing that culture, like the technology? Because there's so much going on in technology right now, and it's affecting every single sector. And we could talk about AI. We could talk about the moving from Wi-Fi to Metastic, and how that's a possibility for the future, and what does that mean exactly for small businesses and communities. All sorts of like topics like that are things that I hadn't really considered, because I want to communicate with people. And that's my main thing, which is a great thing, because all of these topics are, to me, about communication.
I think people underestimate how creative the individuals in those industries really are. As even something as sports is as stolid and stodgy and rigid, athletes are becoming personalities. Well, they've been personalities for a while, some of them, but now I think those industries are understanding how important it is that there's a story and the
Mhm.
individuals can tell and enhance the story, and thus makes it more interesting not only to those who are right into it but to the casual observer as well. I don't know, do you think that the fans see athletes or filmmakers as creatives in the same way, or is that something they're just coming to grips with?
I don't think they do. But I don't think it's like but again, that's just my opinion and my view. Whereas I think one of the biggest like advancements is when a athlete or any type of creator who isn't necessarily a storyteller puts their storyteller hat on and gives it a try. And boy, is that a whole other experience. Like, we saw it during the women's rugby World Cup.
Mhm.
We saw that happening. We saw for the first time, we're hearing stories about who every player is, what their backstory is. And it's a big part of it was they were stepping out of their comfort zone and they were going online and they were telling their own story over social media. So they was very, like, self-driven in many cases. They were continuing the story and showing up even when the traditional media wasn't reporting on their events and their games. So I think that's, like, one of the main assets to social media is that you get to tell your story without having to kowtow, pander, tie it up in a bow so that someone else can tell it for you.
Great points, but I see it the crossover a little differently. For me, I see that a lot of people who were marginal or at whatever they were doing in sports, they were pretty good players or whatever, but a lot of them have taken their social media persona or platform and made that into a career. And people always talk about, oh, now the Paul brothers are boxers now because they were creators and they just did a bunch of dumb junk on the internet, which they did, but they were good at it. And then they get to be multi-millionaires because they're now on Netflix boxing. After, like,
Mm.
what do they know about boxing? Who knows? What do they know about entertainment? Who knows? But together, it's a big thing. But the more mainstream example of that really resonates with me is Paul Bissonnette. If you're not a hockey guy, you're not necessarily familiar with him. You might have seen Biz Nasty on X when it was Twitter, but that guy who was a marginal hockey player, no disrespect, he took from his retirement, he took his goofy Twitter persona, and he parlayed that into a real following, and now he's on the ESPN broadcast. He went from being a
Yeah.
goofball, marginal goon to being probably the most famous guy in hockey in America. I know there's all sorts of Americans who would not recognize Connor McDavid, but they'd recognize Biz Nasty. And that's the kind of thing that I find fascinating about it. If you can sell yourself, if you can use the platform to bring your culture, your art to the masses, you can be successful. And I think that, and I'm fascinated by that, and I'm pleased to help people talk about it and tell people what they're up to, so because somebody will notice. Like, no matter the field, it's the painting or filmmaking, sports media, creators face the same challenges, right? And so we've been doing it. This is our 23rd episode now. What patterns do you see? What do you notice that keeps happening?
I like to hear about what people are inspired by, of course. And obviously, this Biz Nasty guy, he was inspired by telling stories. And it's interesting how, and just to go back to that for 1 second, I just thought it's interesting that, okay, he was a hockey player and now he's a commentator on hockey. Wasn't that a good hockey player, but he's a great storyteller about something that he was pretty good at. So
Great
interesting to
personality.
see. Yeah, and it. it's interesting to see how you can parlay two different things together to make something greater than the sum of its parts, really. And I think that's kind of what he was able to do. The Paul brothers, again, they might not be good at one thing or the other thing, but bringing them together made them greater than the sum of their parts. So that is in and of itself its own action, which
Right.
I think needs to be studied. And I think that is something that we do here is we do look at that. And that's something that I keep seeing coming as to your question. What do you see coming up over and over is people who are willing to not get stuck in one mode of doing anything and being able to be open to being creative because that creativity could start in painting, music, film, but then you can see them opening it up to other modes of being. And that part of that is the communication style of it, and part of that is the embracing different styles of communication, be it in print or be it on YouTube itself. And that's something that I see coming up over and over again, and I'm excited to explore because I see the changing atmosphere and the changing landscape through the changing technology. That's something that I'm very excited about.
That's interesting you say that. When I talk about the patterns I notice that always comes back to burnout, funding, and visibility. These themes come up constantly. I can I feel we're under a little bit of pressure to get a podcast out weekly and to do stuff for our clients and to do stuff for ourselves and just to keep the beast fed. But, you know, I can only imagine what it'd be like if you have one particular thing that you do and everything's counting on you doing that thing on a regular basis in order to support yourself and grow your career. Questions, like I said, they come up all the time, and that's what I notice. So, do you think these conversations help these artists by listening to their own story and other people's story? If you're emerging or you're mid career, do you think we're a positive influence at all?
Well, I like that you're sort of pulling back the curtain and talking about burnout and the pressure of creating, especially when you're on these platforms, because that is the double-edged sword of these platforms, is that it is a great place for you to circumvent traditional media and be your own creator, be your own broadcaster. That's great. But then on the other side, the flip side is the unending pressure to create. And then the burnout that ensues for many creators. And that's very difficult for people who are trying to pull from the well of the inspiration that they've had their entire life to fill up, and now perhaps they've pulled out so much water that it's run dry now. So that's one of it's a very double-edged sword in that regard. What I'm excited about is that people who are in their beginnings of career, mid-career, and even later career. Like Michael Grodnick, for example, I mean, he's been in his career for a while. We had him on the podcast. He was talking about how he coalesced into this great designer and artist of murals on walls, and he found his niche. But he's like, where do I go from here? So even if you're in your late stage career of whatever you're doing right now, I think there's an opportunity that you can find coming on a podcast here to put yourself out there a little bit more, get in front of a few faces that you might not have gotten in front of before, and also see yourself reflected. Maybe through some of the questions that you asked today or another day to somebody else, you can say,
Right.
I never thought about that before. So I think it's a very positive thing for anybody to come on the podcast to just reflect a little bit on, what do I want to create next and how do I want to do it?
Like, I think the podcast is for creators, but it's also for people who love culture and want to understand it better. What do you hope listeners take away when we bring someone on for, say, one week it's a great director like Gail Harvey, and the next week it's a local artist that they probably never come across before?
Yeah, well, I think that you hit it on the head right there, is they may have never come across that before. So, and also one of the nice things is that all the people who were on the podcast can come on again and share their stories, and perhaps they can get introduced to each other. So it's a lot like a party, just coming, mingling, getting to know different people, and doing it in such a relaxed format that there's not a lot of impetus to feel like I need to perform, but it's more and it's less of an interrogation than a let us help some energy arise out of the interaction. And I'm hoping that whoever's listening is also going to feel that energy to, maybe feel like, wow, I didn't know about that. Can I look into that a little bit more or whatever it is? I mean, so that's kind of what I hope they get out of it is just a relaxing, new, possibly educational,
Yeah.
just experience.
So that's, yeah, it sounds fabulous. Like I said, I agree with you because, and that's why we're doing a podcast. But what,
I hope you agree with me.
right? So,
But yeah,
okay.
what do you think? Tell me what you
Well,
think.
listen, I'll tell you what I think in a sec, but what kinds of conversations are you most excited to see us have in our upcoming season in the year 2026?
Oh boy, 2026. Woo. Yeah, I've got a few people who want to talk about AI. So I'm really interested to see what they have to say about that because there is a lot of information out there about AI, but it's not necessarily helpful um, or a lot of misinformation. So it would be good to, I think, have more discussions around technology, how it can help our lives, how it is possibly hindering our lives. And I always bring it back to communication and how to communicate as a real, authentic human. Because again, that's coming up. Is like how do we interact on the internet with real humans? And I think that's one of the things that we bring to the podcast and bring to YouTube is there might be a little bit of a uh, burnout from the audience in watching AI created videos. So that's one thing that I think is very positive in 2026. We actually bring real people on and talk to them about real issues that we're all kind of experiencing. And I think that is a valuable asset.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like to wrap up. It's like we're real people. We're interested in real people. We're curious. We're not gatekeepers. We're not trying to say what is and what isn't artistic and what is or who isn't a creator. If you think, wow, that sounds great. I'd love to come on the show. Yeah, reach out. We're really excited to speak to you. And if you're a creator, whether you're behind a canvas, a camera, a mic, a scoreboard, we want to hear from you. This is Culture Junkie, the Culture Junkie podcast, and we want to share your gifts with whoever is interested in listening.
Yeah. So thanks for chatting with me today about it, Keith. It's been really fun. And we're gonna see what's going on for 2026.
Yeah, we should talk more. It's like we don't get to talk enough.
I know.
All right. Anyway, thanks, Xandra. I hope everyone enjoys this. But like I said, big things coming up in 2026. We look forward to getting your comments and your feedback. Like and subscribe. We're delicious. Can I say that?
Well, you just did.
Good. I hope Darren doesn't hear me. All right. See ya.